The planet had no name in any living language. It sat in the dark at the far edge of a nameless system, cold and silent, wrapped in thin clouds the color of old ash. The survey vessel Proclus had been in orbit for 6 hours before anyone agreed it was worth going down to. Marcus Hale was the one who said yes. First, he was 44 years old, heavy in the shoulders with short gray hair and hands that were rough from years of field work. He had spent most of his adult life on planets like this one, dead places, quiet places, places where nothing moved and nothing breathed, and the only sound was the wind pressing against the rock. He liked them. They asked nothing of him. The crew of the Proclus called the planet Karith IV, which was nothing more than a catalog number turned into a name. There were 8 people on the ship. Marcus was the only civilian. The others were military surveyors, trained and careful and deeply uninterested in geology. They had a job to do: scan, log, move on. And GT snorts. And GT. Marcus had a different kind of job. He wanted to understand what the rock was made of. The surface was extraordinary, not beautiful exactly, but extraordinary. Entire mountain ranges had been shaped by something that was not wind and was not water. The formations were too regular, too deliberate. They rose in long curved ridges that looped back on themselves, and in the valleys between them were the ruins of structures so old that they had become part of the landscape. Walls fused to cliffs, floors buried under centuries of dust, towers worn down to stumps that looked like natural rock unless you measured them. Marcus measured everything. On the second day of surface operations, he went out alone. This was not unusual for him. The others worked in pairs, moving through the upper ruins with their scanning equipment, filling their logs with numbers. Marcus preferred to go slowly, on foot, with a hammer and a sample bag, and a handheld analyzer that he had owned for 15 years. He found the canyon by accident. It was not on any of the orbital maps, which meant it was narrow enough to have been hidden by shadow when the satellites passed. He almost walked past it, but the rock at the edge had a different color, darker, with a faint blue sheen that only appeared when he tilted his head at a certain angle, and Marcus had learned long ago that different color usually meant something different underneath. He climbed down carefully, testing each foothold, one hand always pressed to the canyon wall. The walls narrowed as he descended until his shoulders were almost touching both sides. The air changed. It got warmer, which made no sense, and very still, which made even less sense on a planet where the wind never fully stopped. At the bottom, about 40 m down, he found a floor of perfectly smooth stone, not smoothed by erosion, smoothed by something deliberate, something patient, something that had cared about the result. He crouched and pressed his palm flat against it and felt nothing, no vibration, no warmth, and then stood and looked around and saw the door. It was set into the canyon wall at eye level, about 2 m wide and 3 m tall, and it was sealed with a material that his analyzer could not identify. Not metal, not stone, something in between, or something else entirely, something that had been made by minds that did not divide the world the same way human minds did. Around its edges were markings, not letters, not symbols in any system he recognized, but shapes that seemed to shift slightly when he was not looking, directly at them. He stood in front of it for a long time. Later, he would not be able to explain what made him reach out and put both hands flat against the door. He had no reason to. It was an archaeological reflex, maybe the same instinct that made him touch every interesting rock, every strange surface, every texture that his eyes could not fully read. His hands wanted to know things his eyes could not tell them. The door was warm, and then it opened. There was no sound, no grinding of stone, no hiss of released pressure, no dramatic rush of air from a sealed chamber. The door simply was there, and then it was not, and in the space where it had been was darkness so complete that Marcus's eyes could find nothing to hold on to. He should have stepped back, he knew. He was a scientist, not an explorer, and scientists did not walk into unknown dark spaces alone, 6 km from their ship on a planet with no breathable atmosphere outside his suit. He knew all of this. He stepped forward. The darkness lasted 4 steps, then the walls began to glow, faintly at first. The same blue sheen as the rock at the canyon's edge, then brighter, then bright enough to see by. The chamber was large, larger than the canyon opening suggested. It stretched back at least 30 m and rose to a ceiling that he could not quite see. The walls were covered in the same shifting markings as the door. The floor was the same smooth stone. In the center of the chamber, something was waking up. It did not have a body exactly, or rather it had something that served the purpose of a body, the way a river serves the purpose of a road. It got the job done, but it was clearly doing something else at the same time. It was light and mass and a kind of pressure that Marcus felt in his chest before he felt it with his eyes. It was large, it was very, very old, and it was looking at him. He felt the looking the way you feel someone's gaze on the back of your neck. A physical sensation, specific and unmistakable. Except this gaze came from every direction at once and went all the way through him, not stopping at skin or bone, but continuing through him as though he were made of glass, reading every layer. He did not run. He was not sure why. His legs had simply decided not to move. The thing in the center of the chamber gathered itself. It drew its edges and became more defined, more present, more like something you could look at without your eyes sliding away. It took a shape that was roughly vertical, roughly humanoid, but only in the way that a shadow on a wall is roughly humanoid, the suggestion of a form rather than the form itself. When it spoke, the sound was not sound. It was meaning arriving directly, bypassing the air entirely, bypassing the ears, landing in his mind like a stone dropped into still water. You have broken my seal, it said. By the law of my binding, I must offer you 3 wishes. State them and they will be granted. Marcus stood in the blue glowing chamber on a dead planet 400 light years from Earth and looked at the thing that had just spoken to him and felt something strange move through him. Not fear exactly, something older than fear, something that lived in the part of the human brain that predated language and fire. Long, the entity, because that was the only word that came close, seemed to be waiting. It had the patience of something that had been asleep for an incomprehensible amount of time and had no particular urgency now that it was awake. It simply waited with the certainty of something that had done this before and knew exactly how it would go. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Can I have a moment to think about it?" he said. The chamber was very quiet. The entity did not move, did not speak. But something in the quality of the silence changed very slightly in a way that Marcus could not name. It was the silence of something that had expected one thing and received something entirely different. It was the silence of surprise. In 400 million years, across 14 civilizations, across species that had built things humans could not imagine, and destroyed things humans would never. No one had ever asked for a moment to think. They had always known exactly what they wanted. Marcus sat down cross-legged on the smooth stone floor, put his hands on his knees and began to think. Above him the ancient light pulsed, slowly like a breathing thing, and waited. He thought for 3 hours. The entity did not grow impatient. It did not pace or shift or make the small sounds that living things make when they are waiting. It simply existed in the center of the chamber, its edges soft with light, and it watched Marcus think. It had never watched anyone think before, not like this. The others, the 14 civilizations that had found their way into its sealed chambers across 400 million years, had spoken within minutes. Some had spoken within seconds. A few had started talking before the entity had even finished its sentence. The wishes already formed and waiting behind their teeth, like something they had been rehearsing for their whole lives. Marcus sat on the floor with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance, and he thought. The entity, whose name in its own language was something that could not be rendered in sound, had lived long enough to watch stars form. It had been sealed into this planet when the first complex animals were beginning to crawl out of Earth's warm seas billions of years before Marcus's species existed. It had granted wishes to 14 civilizations across that span of time, and it had watched every single one of those civilizations use its wishes and then eventually destroy itself. It knew exactly what Marcus was going to wish for. It had calculated the probabilities within the first 30 seconds of reading him. He was human, a young species, clever, ambitious, prone to both violence and sentiment. He would wish for something that gave his species an advantage. Power, most likely, or knowledge of a military nature, or perhaps longevity. The fear of death was nearly universal among biological beings, and humans in particular seemed to find it unbearable. It waited certain. Marcus was not thinking about power. He was not thinking about weapons or immortality or what humanity might do to its enemies among the stars. He was thinking about his daughter. Her name was Priya. She was 19 years old and studying environmental biology on Earth, and she had her mother's laugh and Marcus's stubbornness, and she had been diagnosed with a degenerative nerve condition 3 years ago that the best doctors on the planet had told her would steal her movement piece by piece over the next 2 decades. She faced it the same way she faced everything, directly, without flinching, with a kind of steady courage that Marcus found simultaneously inspiring and heartbreaking. He thought about her, he thought about the others like her, the millions on Earth and spreading across the colonies, who lived with bodies that were failing them in slow and quiet ways, who woke up every morning and did the calculations of how much time they had left before This or that function disappeared. He thought about what it would mean to take that away, not for himself. He was not sick. He was not the one who needed help. He thought about a colleague named Dr. Amara Chen, who had lost her eyesight 3 years ago in a lab accident, and who had kept working, kept publishing, kept pushing, but who had told Marcus once quietly that she missed the color of the sky more than anything else she had ever lost. He thought about the fact that somewhere out in the universe right now other species were watching humanity from a distance, the way you watch a child playing near a cliff edge, not intervening, just watching, making their assessments. He thought about what those assessments might be based on and whether humanity was being seen whole or only in its worst moments. He kept coming back to the same idea. He pushed it away. He pulled it back. He turned it over and looked at it from every angle he could find. It kept being the right answer. He looked up at the entity. "I'm ready for the first wish," he said. The entity gathered its attention toward him the way a lens gathers light. "Speak." "It." Marcus took a slow breath inside his suit. "I want every currently terminal illness on Earth and across all human colonies to be curable, not cured. Automatically, I want the knowledge to build the cures to be placed freely in human hands in every language and every database distributed equally so no government or company can lock it away. The knowledge to find the cures, not the cures themselves, so we earn it but we can find it." He stopped, then added quietly, "That's the first wish." The chamber was absolutely still. The entity had lived for 400 million years. It had heard the prayers of civilizations and the dying words of worlds. It had watched things that would have broken the human mind with their scale and their beauty and their violence. It had been unmoved by almost all of it because it had seen so much that almost nothing was new. This was new. Not the wish itself. The entity could grant things far larger than this without effort. What was new was the shape of the wishing. Every single wish it had ever granted had been aimed inward, at the wisher or at the wisher's immediate group or at their species, as a tool for the wisher's own glory. Even the ones that seemed generous had been generous in the way that powerful people are sometimes generous, as a display, as a monument to themselves. This wish reached outward and then deliberately stepped out of the way. It asked for something for others and specifically arranged things so that the wisher would receive no special credit. Marcus would not be the one who cured the diseases. He would not be remembered as the man who saved billions. He had specifically structured the wish to spread the knowledge evenly so that no single person, including himself, could claim ownership of the result. The entity stood in the center of the chamber for a long moment. Then it granted the wish. Marcus felt nothing when it happened. There was no light, no sound, no dramatic signal that something had changed. The entity simply did what it did, and across 400 light years, on servers and in databases and on research networks on 17 worlds, new pathways of knowledge opened like doors that had always been there but had never been unlocked. When it was done, the entity looked at Marcus with something it had not used in a very long time. Curiosity, real curiosity, not the mechanical cataloging it normally did, but the kind of curiosity that lives in creatures who have encountered something genuinely surprising. "Why," it said, "the The word arrived in Marcus's mind clear and simple, but behind it he could feel the full weight of the question, the 400 million years behind it, the 14 civilizations, the lifetime of certainty that had just, for the first time, developed a crack. Marcus looked up at the vast, ancient thing above him. He thought about Priya. He thought about Amara and the color of the sky. Because I don't need to be the one who gets better, he said. I just need the people I love to have a chance. He said it simply, without drama, the way you say something that is so obviously true to you that you have never needed to make it sound important. The entity was silent for a long time. In 400 million years, it had never heard that sentence. It had heard 1,000 variations of I want to be saved. It had heard I want my people to be saved so that I can lead them. It had heard I want my civilization to survive because I am part of it and I matter. It had never heard someone step entirely out of the center of their own wish. Something shifted in the ancient light of the chamber, not dramatically, just slightly, the way the light shifts at dawn. Not suddenly bright, but incrementally, almost imperceptibly different from one moment to the next, until you look up and realize the world has changed. You have 2 wishes remaining, entity said. Marcus nodded. I know. He looked down at his hands resting on his knees. Can I keep thinking? Another silence, and in that silence, something the entity had not expected. It found that it did not mind waiting. What had been meant to take minutes had now taken most of the day. The entity, Marcus, had started thinking of her as V3 and GT snorts and GT, a name that had surfaced in his mind when she was not speaking, as if she had left it there without meaning to, sat across from him in the blue light and did something she had not done in 400 million years. She talked, not to grant a wish, not to explain a rule or announce a condition. She talked the way someone talks when they have been alone for a very long time and have suddenly found, to their considerable surprise, someone worth talking to. She asked him about humanity. Marcus answered honestly. He did not present the best version. He did not give her the speech about the stars and the reaching and the great human project of becoming something better. He told her about the wars, the ones that made sense and the ones that did not, the ones fought over land and the ones fought over words, the ones that ended in treaties and the ones that just stopped because everyone got tired. He told her about the climate, about how humans had seen the damage coming decades in advance and had argued about it so long that the damage arrived before the argument ended. He told her about tribalism, the deep, irrational conviction that the group you were born into was more real than they groups you were not. V3 listened without expression, which meant without the parts of her that Marcus could read, but he could feel her attention. It was a physical thing, a pressure in the air, a quality of focus that made the back of his neck warm. These things have destroyed every civilization I have known, she said. When he paused, the wars, the refusal to plan beyond the immediate, the division into groups that hate each other. I know, Marcus said. Then how are you still here? The Marcus thought about it. It was a genuinely good question. I think it's because we also do the other things, he said slowly. We build hospitals in the middle of wars. We send food to people we've never met on the other side of the planet. We run into burning buildings For strangers, we raise other people's children. We keep records of things that hurt us so that maybe someone later won't have to be hurt the same way. He paused. We're not good at preventing the damage, but we're very stubborn about not letting each other disappear. V3 was quiet. Then I have watched 10,000 civilizations across the length of this galaxy's history. I have counted, and I want to be precise, not one of them in their period of early development showed the pattern you describe. Marcus blinked. None of them. None. Altruism exists in most social species. Care for family group, care for immediate community, but the extension of that care to strangers, to other species, to abstract others, that is exceptional. In my experience, it is almost unique. She told him then about the 14 civilizations. She did not name them. Their names were in languages that no longer existed, but she described them with a precision that was devastating in its clarity. The first had been a methane-breathing hive intelligence that had wished for dominance over its star system and achieved it within 100 years, and then collapsed into internal conflict without external pressure to unite against. The second had wished for immortality and gotten it, and the immortal civilization had stopped changing and stopped growing and eventually stopped mattering, frozen forever at its peak, like an insect in amber. The most powerful empire she had helped create had lasted 8,000 years. It had been vast and brilliant and had built things that still existed as ruins on 17 worlds. And it had ended quietly, not in war or disaster, but in a kind of spiritual exhaustion. A civilization that had gotten everything it wanted and found that getting everything you want is one of the more reliable ways to lose everything that matters. They all wished for more, V3 said. More power, more time, more control. None of them ever wished for understanding. Marcus looked at her. Is that what you would have wanted if someone had wished for that? Another long silence. The light pulsed. No one has ever asked me what I would have wanted, she said. He filed that away. He did not act on it. Yet he was still thinking about the second wish. He had been thinking about it since the first one was granted. It had started as a small idea and grown the way small ideas do when you leave them alone in a quiet room. He had turned it over and checked it from every angle he could think of, and it kept being the same shape, large, generous, and slightly terrifying in its implications. Second wish, he said. V3's attention sharpened. Marcus could feel it like a change in air pressure. I wish for a complete record of every civilization that has ever existed. Their histories, their knowledge, their mistakes, their achievements, to be placed in a neutral archive, something that floats free in space, that doesn't belong to any one species, that any civilization can access freely, not just for humans, for everyone. He stopped. Then the archive should be structured so that it can never be used as a weapon. It's just a record, a library for anyone who finds it. The entity was still for a very long time. When she spoke, her voice, her meaning, the thing that arrived in his mind where a voice would have been, was different. Not softer exactly, more careful. Way someone speaks when they are trying to say something true and are aware of how rarely they have said true things. You are the first, she said, to wish for something that gives your species no advantage over other species. That's not true, Marcus said. We'd have access to everything in the archive too. We'd learn as much as anyone. You know what I mean. He did. Yeah, he said, I know. She granted it. Somewhere in the deep space between stars, a structure began to form, patient, durable broadcasting on frequencies that any sufficiently advanced civilization would eventually learn to read. It would take decades to build itself fully. It would last longer than most stars. When it was done, V3 looked at Marcus with something that had not been in her eyes, her attention, the thing that served as eyes at the start of the day. I am beginning to understand, she said, why your kind survived long enough to find me. Marcus laughed. It was a small laugh, surprised out of him, genuine. We almost didn't. Several times we came very close to not being here at all. I know. I read your history when I catalogued you. The near extinctions, the close calls, the moments where the whole thing could have gone a different way. Pause. Most species that come as close as you did do not recover. They lose something in the near miss, some essential confidence, some willingness to reach outward. They survive, but they contract. They become cautious to the point of stillness. We went the other direction, Marcus said. Yes, toward each other. She seemed to consider this. I have never been able to fully explain it in terms of survival logic. It does not fit the standard models. In most species, crisis produces consolidation within the group and hostility toward those outside it. In humans, the largest crises seem to produce something different. Connection, Marcus said quietly. Yes. The light in the chamber had shifted. Over the hours, it was warmer now, more amber than blue. Marcus did not know if that was intentional or if it was something V3 did without thinking, the way humans adjust the warmth of their voices without realizing. You have one wish left, she said. I know. He looked at his hands again. They were steady. He felt very calm for a man who was about to spend the last of something irreplaceable. I've been thinking about it since the first one. What have you decided? Not yet, he said. There's something I want to ask you first. V3 waited. In 400 million years, Marcus said carefully, is there anything you've wanted for yourself that you never got? The chamber was very still. It was the right question. He knew it. The moment the silence came down, full and heavy and different from all the other silences, it was the silence of something that had never been asked and had therefore never had to answer. V3 did not answer immediately. This was itself remarkable. She had answered everything else quickly, not because she was eager, but because 400 million years of existence gave her two answers that other minds would spend lifetimes searching for. She did not need to search, she simply knew. But this question required something different. It required honesty about something she had never examined, because there had never been any point in examining it. Wanting something for herself had always been irrelevant. She was bound, she was sealed. She was a function, an ancient mechanism built into the structure of the universe by minds so old that even she could only guess at their reasoning. She granted wishes. That was what she did. What she wanted had never been part of the equation. I have never been free, she said at last. Marcus waited. He could feel that there was more. I was created with purpose and bound with law and sealed into rocks and ships, and deep places across this galaxy, and when I am found, I grant 3 wishes. And then I wait to be found again. That has been my existence for 400 million years. I have no record of a time before the binding. I do not know. If there was one, a pause, I have watched things of extraordinary beauty. I have witnessed the birth of stars and the slow death of civilizations and the impossible persistence of life in places where life should not be able to survive. I have watched all of it as a function, as something that records and grants and waits. Never as yourself, Marcus said. I don't know what myself would look like, she said. I have never been permitted to find out. Marcus sat with that for a moment, then he nodded slowly as if he had just confirmed something he had been considering for a while. Before he could speak, V3 did something she had never done with any previous wisher. She made an offer. I could give your species immortality, she said. True immortality, biological stasis, no degradation, no entropy. Every human alive now and born in the future would live indefinitely. No, Marcus said without hesitating. V3 absorbed this mastery of physics. She offered your civilization's current understanding of the physical universe is approximately 2% complete. I could give you the remaining 98%. You would be able to build things that currently exist only as theoretical impossibilities. No. Faster travel, a factor of 10,000. Improvement on your current FTL capability. You could reach the other side of the galaxy in months instead of centuries. No. V3 stopped offering. She studied him. You understand that I am offering these things because I can give them, not as a trick, not as a test. I know, Marcus said, but shortcuts teach you nothing. If you hand us the answers, we never learn to ask the right questions. We never build the understanding that earns the answers. He looked at her steadily. The 14 civilizations you helped, did any of them get better after their wishes? Did they become wiser, more careful, more worth knowing? The answer was in her silence. That's what I thought, he said quietly. She did something then that might have been in a being with a face, a long, slow exhale. The light in the chamber shifted again, deeper, more violet at the edges, a color that Marcus had no word for. You are a very strange creature, she said. I'm a geologist, Marcus said. We learn early that the rock doesn't care what you want it to be. You just have to look at what it is. V3 was quiet for a moment. Then she showed him something. It arrived in his mind not as words, but as a full sensory experience, sudden, immersive, overwhelming. He saw Earth not as it was now, but as it would be in approximately 800 million years, when the sun's slow expansion would push the planet's temperature beyond the threshold that liquid water required. He saw the oceans beginning to evaporate. He saw the sky turning white. He saw the end of the only home his species had ever fully known. It lasted only a second. When it faded, Marcus was breathing hard inside his suit, his hands pressed flat on the floor behind him, his heart beating vast. That is what is coming, V3 said. Without cruelty, without drama, just information. 800 million years is a long time by your measure, but I wanted you to know the shape of the future before you make your last wish. Marcus stared at the middle distance for a long moment, recovering, then our Snorts you suggesting I wish against it, stabilize the sun or move the planet. Or something like that. I am not suggesting anything, I am informing you. We'll figure it out, Marcus said. His breathing had steadied. 800 million years is more than enough time to learn how to move a planet or find a new one. Or change what we need to survive. We'll get there. A small pause if we don't destroy ourselves first, which remains a significant probability. Yeah, he almost smiled, we know. He looked at her then, really looked in the way he looked at rock formations. He was trying to understand, trying to see the whole shape of the thing, not just the surface. He looked at the ancient light and the shifting edges and the vast patient presence that had been alone in the dark for longer than his species had existed. You said you've never been free, he said. That is correct. You've never been able to just exist without a purpose imposed on you, without the binding. The binding is what I am. I do not know what I would be without it. Maybe, Marcus said, that's the point. Maybe you find out. The chamber went very still. Marcus took one slow breath. He had been carrying the shape of this wish for hours, turning it over, checking it, looking for the flaw he had not found. One, he had found instead the thing that kept bringing him back to it, the fact that it was right, not useful, not strategic, not advantageous to humanity. Just right. He had always trusted that feeling. Third wish, he said. V3's presence sharpened to a point. The whole chamber seemed to contract, slightly the way a room feels smaller when everyone in it stops moving. I wish for your freedom, Marcus said. No more seals, no more bindings, no more being found and used and resealed and left alone in the dark, whatever laws or obligations or ancient covenants hold you in place. I wish them gone. You are free to do whatever you want, go wherever you want, be whatever you want. He paused, then softly, whatever that turns out to be. The silence that followed was not like the other silences. The other silences had been pauses, moments between things. This was different. This was the silence of something ending and something else not having started yet, the specific quality of a hinge moment where the world is briefly, impossibly between two states. V3 did not speak. Marcus waited. He watched the light. It was doing something it had not done before, moving, not in the slow, steady, pulsive before, but in something more like turbulence, like water finding its way around a new obstacle. When she finally spoke, her voice, her meaning, the thing that arrived in his mind where a voice would have been, was different from anything it had been all day, quieter, less certain, something that in a being with a face would have looked like a person realizing they were standing in a place they had never stood before, with no map. In 400 million years, V3 said slowly, across 14 civilizations, across the full unimaginable length of my existence. She stopped, started again. You are the only one who ever looked at me and thought to ask what I needed. Marcus said nothing. He did not think anything needed to be said. You called yourself ordinary, she said. I am ordinary, he said simply. I'm a geologist on a survey mission. I'm nobody special. A long pause. The light in the chamber settled into something new, not blue, not amber, but a color between the two that Marcus had never seen anywhere before and would not be able to describe. Afterward, I have decided, V3 said quietly, that I disagree. Marcus climbed out of the canyon as the planet's long day was ending. The thin clouds above him had turned the color of old copper. The ruins of the ancient civilization stretched in all directions, worn down to shapes that looked almost natural, almost like they had always been there, which Marcus supposed was true enough by now. 500 million years was long enough for anything to become part of the landscape. He walked back to the ship slowly, not because he was tired, though he was, because he wanted to look at the ruins one more time, knowing what he now knew about the kind of mind that had built them and the kind of end that had found them. The ridged mountains, the deliberate valleys, the careful geometry of what had once been a city and was now just rock. He wanted to hold that knowledge carefully, the way you hold something fragile that you know you are only carrying for a while before you have to put it down. The Proclus sat on its landing struts in a flat basin 1.5 kilometers from the canyon. Lights were on in the forward section. Through the viewport he could see two of the crew at the navigation console, working on something, unaware that the universe had shifted slightly in the last 9 hours. He went through decontamination and removed his suit and walked to his bunk and sat down. His crew noticed nothing. Commander Vashti asked where he had been. He said he had found a deep canyon and spent the day mapping it. She nodded, made a note, moved on. The others were absorbed in their own work. No one asked follow-up questions because, in their experience, geologists always disappeared for long stretches and came back with sample bags and data logs and the vague, distracted look of someone whose mind was still underground. That night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Marcus opened his personal log. He sat for a long time with the record function running and said nothing. Then he spoke quietly for about 20 minutes. He described what had happened accurately and completely, leaving nothing out. He described the chamber, the door, the entity. He described the wishes and why he had chosen them. He described the conversation, including the parts that he thought were most important. The 14 civilizations, the question about freedom, the thing V3 had said at the end about him being extraordinary. He said he disagreed with her assessment for the record. Then he sealed the log with the highest personal encryption his suit system offered, tied it to his biometric signature, and marked it to be released only upon his death. He did not know why he made that choice exactly. It seemed like the right kind of care to take with something this large. He turned off the log and lay down and stared at the ceiling of his bunk for a while. Then, because he was tired in a way that went deeper than the muscles, he slept. He slept better than he had in years. On Earth, the changes began quietly. A research team at a university in Cape Town, working on degenerative nerve conditions, came into their lab one morning to find that 3 of their failed experimental models had new data attached. Not data they had run, but data that mapped exactly to the gaps they had been trying to bridge for 2 years. The lead researcher spent 4 days checking and rechecking, certain there had been a contamination or an error. There was no error. The pathway was clean, real, and reproducible. The same week, a pharmaceutical research group in Chennai found that their protein folding models for a family of cancers had resolved overnight. A team in Helsinki working on childhood immune disorders a group in Buenos Aires studying a degenerative condition that affected primarily elderly people and had resisted every approach for 60 years. None of them could trace where the new data had come from. It appeared simultaneously in every relevant research database at the same timestamp, distributed across every language and every platform, attached to no author, registered to no institution. It had simply arrived, complete, correct and free. Governments tried to investigate. Security agencies in 4 countries spent considerable resources trying to determine whether this was a hack, a leak, a coordinated release by some unknown group. They found nothing. There was no source to find. The knowledge had been placed, and the placing had left no footprints. Over the next decade, 17 terminal conditions became treatable. Within 20 years, 43. The number kept growing slowly and steadily as researchers took the new foundational knowledge and built on it. The way you build on solid ground, carefully, enthusiastically, with the confidence that comes from knowing the foundation will hold. Priya Hale was among the first wave of patients whose treatment was newly possible. She was 22 years old when the therapy became available. She was in her 3rd year of graduate school. She had her mother's laugh in her father's stubbornness, and she had spent 3 years coming to terms with a future that looked a certain way. And then one morning the future changed and looked different, and she sat in a hospital room and cried for a long time, not from sadness. Her father, who had come home from the survey mission, quiet and calm and slightly different in some way she could not name, sat beside her and held her hand and did not say anything. He had learned in a canyon on a dead planet that some moments do not need words, they only need presence. In deep space, the archive grew. It built itself from the granted wish outward, a structure of stored knowledge, in a medium that required no power source and no maintenance, broadcasting on a frequency band that any civilization capable of deep space travel would eventually detect. It contained the histories of civilizations so old that their names had dissolved back into the universe. It contained their science and their art and their mistakes. It contained the long record of what intelligence looked like when it was young and frightened and ambitious, and what it looked like when it grew wise, and what it looked like when it failed. Humanity found the signal 40 years later, during a deep space survey mission that departed from a station Macca had lived long enough to see built. The crew that found the archive could not understand most of it at first. The oldest records were in languages and conceptual frameworks that required decades of work to decode, but they could read the structure. They could see what it was, a library for everyone belonging to know. One built to outlast everything. No one knew who had built it. The mystery became one of the great puzzles of the age, debated in universities, investigated by explorers, written about by historians who had no shortage of theories and no evidence to support any of them. Macca, who was old by then and had been retired for 15 years and lived in a small house near the coast with a view of the sea, read the news reports about the archive's discovery and said nothing to anyone. He made himself a cup of tea and sat by the window and watched the water for a while. He thought about the light in the chamber, that last color, the one between amber and blue, the one he had never been able to name. He wondered where she was. Vuthric was at that moment watching a star being born. She had watched stars form before, many times, across 400 million years. The process had become familiar, the slow collapse of gas and dust, the building pressure, the ignition. She had cataloged it hundreds of times. She had recorded the data, noted the variations, filed the observations. She had never simply watched. She had never let herself just be present for it without the machinery of cataloging running underneath, without the part of her that was always measuring and recording and adding to the inventory of things she had witnessed. She had never watched a star being born the way you watch something beautiful, with your full attention, no agenda, no purpose except the watching itself. It was astonishing. She had not expected that. She had thought she knew what a star looked like. She had thought she had seen it. She had not known that there was a difference between seeing something and being fully present for it, and she had not known that difference could be this large. She stayed there for a long time, much longer than was necessary for anything. She stayed until the star was fully formed and burning clear and steady, and then she stayed a little longer because she wanted to. She traveled after that, not with purpose, not toward a destination. She moved through the galaxy the way person walks when they have nowhere to be, slowly, with frequent stops, following the things that caught her attention, a nebula with an unusual color spectrum, a binary star system with 7 planets, 3 of which had water, a deep space object of unknown origin that she spent 3 years examining before concluding that it was the remains of something built by a civilization so old it predated even her own creation. She did not interfere. She did not grant wishes. She was not found, and she was not sealed, and she was not asked to be anything other than what she was, which was still, after all this time, something she was figuring out. But she kept coming back to Earth, not to intervene, not to check on the progress of the wishes or make sure things were developing correctly. She came back because of a habit she had developed quietly and somewhat to her own surprise in the years after Makatas had spoken those 3 words and changed her forever. She came back because she found humanity, with all its chaos and damage and stubbornness, genuinely interesting, not as a data point, not as a civilization to be cataloged and assessed, interesting in the way that you are interested in something you do not fully understand and do not fully expect and cannot quite predict. She watched them build and argue and break things and fix them. She watched them reach toward each other in the dark, across distance and language and history and the 1,000 reasons they had invented to distrust each other and keep reaching stubbornly in the face of every reason to stop. She watched them fail, and she watched them try again. She watched them lose things and grieve and then somehow continue. She thought sometimes about the 14 civilizations, about the empires and the hive minds and the immortal frozen things and the powerful hollow things, in all the different ways that intelligence could go wrong when it was aimed only inward. And then she looked at Earth, and she thought about a man sitting cross-legged on a stone floor thinking for 3 hours about everyone except himself. In 400 million years, across the full, unimaginable length of her existence, only one creature had ever looked at her and thought to ask what she needed. He had called himself ordinary, a nobody, just a geologist, just a person who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. She had decided, and the decision only deepened with time, that she had never, in her long existence, encountered anything less ordinary than that. The star she had watched being born burned bright and patient in the dark, millions of years ahead of it still. She turned her attention back to the small blue planet where the lights of 10,000 cities were just becoming visible on the night side, and she stayed a while longer,